Welcome to Revive Ministries Podcast. This month we are revisiting a theme we actually had last year, and it is building a home. A lot of times, environment when it comes to someone's overall stability, someone's overall health, whatever age category, whether you're in your teenage years or older, it can provide. It can be some of the elements that can be either for positively in your favor or against you. But a lot of times when I think of environment, it's never ideal. So my whole thing is, if you could say I need help in that environment, that's usually a good starting point. There's a Cypriot proverb says, when your garden is dry, don't pour water in other gardens. It's important to know where your boundaries are. I don't proselytize in this podcast, but I do think of Jacob on Esau when I think about building a home. Jacob was fleeing, just to give a short synopsis, from his brother Esau from taking the birthright. But one thing that was interesting about that story was he ended up in Bethel, and it was just a rock. He was just on the floor, and that was home for him. And for me, I just remember that story being impactful and understand that home is not just a place with walls and all that, but also it's an idea, it's a mindset, it's an idea that I feel safe where I'm at. Today we're bringing in a new guest. His name is Michael J. Chanley. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your insight and this being part of the conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me. We're excited to talk to you.
I just want to share a little disclaimer for those who are listening. I don't like reinvent the wheel, so if you are in crisis and you need help, like I said before, ask for help, whether it's in a church setting, whether it's a small group, whatever it is. I don't like I said, whatever you feel comfortable is, try to find help, especially if you're in crisis. But I like to start off with people who said it better than I do, Michael. And I like George Moore, it's an open-ended. I like how he kind of allows us to interpret this quote. And it says, a man travels the world over in search of what he needs and returns home to find it. What comes to mind when you hear this?
That's a. So I think there's something in our hearts that's always seeking for more. I think when people grow up in a home where their earliest foundational years are maybe not the best, or maybe there's abuse that happens, or just some traumatic event. I think a lot of those people go through life trying to find something to heal that early scar they experienced, and maybe even trying to find worldly things to put in their heart that will fill the gap, or the part where they should have been loved, or they feel like they missed out on something. I think people search the whole world looking for love in all the wrong places. If you don't mind the pun.
No, it is true, and I also would say that we tend to generalize what our needs are, and I feel that can be cumbersome because the idea is I have my context that's specific to me, so whatever that may be. It doesn't fit nicely in the neat box, like just to get a bunch of stuff, or even just to go on vacation. There's this notion that if I feel miserable here, and no matter where I go, I still take myself with me. So
yeah,
it is something to think upon when we're thinking, oh, I want to improve on my home. It starts from you, and then it starts from the people around you, and then slowly.
So when I was a kid, I'm a child of divorce, and I was a juvenile delinquent. I was a really I was always a nice person, but I was a lawless person. And so whenever I became an adult, I guess I was 17, I joined the Marine Corps, and I was looking for something in my life that would give me direction, would give me purpose. And the amazing thing is that I came home when I got in the Marine Corps, and I got saved in the Marine Corps. I came home to my faith in the Marine Corps. I got married in the Marine Corps. I started a family in the Marine Corps. All these things happened when I was out searching the world, looking for things to fulfill purpose in my life. It was literally coming home that brought me back to the very things I was seeking.
Yeah, and the one thing James Baldwin says is perhaps home is not a place, but simply an irrevocable condition. we're playing on, it's a play on words, but the idea is it's kind of like a state of mind. I think of home right now. We're getting into the holiday season. There's something about this time being some of the most warm feeling when you think of your childhood at times, depending on your context, but also it could be some of the most tragic. Sometimes just be just simply empty seats around the dinner table right now. We're still coming out of COVID-19 and some of the losses that people experience around the world. Those tables are shorter per se, and sometimes it's harder when we're thinking about this time of year. And I always like to emphasize, this topic of home and family and connectedness. Thanksgiving, we're supposed to be grateful, but it's hard to feel grateful when you're in the valley per se, when you're really struggling. So sometimes I always say, especially working in the mental health field, make your just how you treat, like if you had diabetes or you had some chronic illness that's more accepted. Do the same if you're struggling with your emotions, if you're struggling with your mental health, or if you're struggling with substance use. Just get a second opinion, find out more. It's not the problem. Sometimes is that we treat the illness when it comes to mental health or whatever as attachment to our value, and I feel sometimes that becomes problematic because we don't do it with anything else medically. So I feel that sometimes becomes a barrier when it comes to finding that place of comfort and getting the help that you need in that regard.
It's interesting. I think about that quote from Baldwin, and it's there is something about knowing what makes you feel comfortable. Well, I used to travel a lot. I've been to about 40 different countries doing missions work, and I would often, when I would feel homesick and feel lonely, I would find myself craving Kentucky Fried Chicken. And it was such a weird thing to crave. I'm like, why? Because I don't eat Kentucky Fried. I just don't eat a lot of fried foods. But it finally clicked that my grandparents, who pretty much raised me, they were very dear to me and very, very good people. They always took me to Kentucky Fried Chicken. They loved it. And so there was something about that and chocolate milkshakes that I always craved when I was feeling homesick. And so it is kind of a condition, it is that sense of there are certain things that can, in the way that things can trigger trauma or trigger pain, there are certain things that can also trigger good nostalgia and a sense of comfort, a sense of home.
Yeah. Like I said in the beginning of this, the monologue, in the story of Jacob and Esau, he was running away. He was literally fleeing, and he felt safer on a rock, his head on a rock, in the middle of nowhere, and that was his home. That was his home at that time. And to emphasize, I just love the illustration, because a lot of times it's like, oh well, you could be in a big house and feel like you're not at home. You could be in a house that you feel empty, you don't feel connected. There's so many little parallels and different connecting points that I feel sometimes we overlook. I think Ralph Waldo Emerson says a house is made with walls and beams. Home is made with love and dreams. There's this idea of there's something intangible that's in a home that we can't really describe. You say Kentucky Fried Chicken, I think about half South Korean, so we had a lot of karaoke. Whenever I hear certain songs, it's just like it was what our family did. It sounds odd for some people, but I just remember, still to this day, my grandfather who passed away several years ago. I was terrified at 8 years old or whatever. I sang "Boys to Men," and I sang so horribly, but it's just something that I remember getting up there, and then everyone does. It just felt like family, felt like home. It's something that we did. So everyone has their thing, and for me, I have fond memories of it. Even though at first it was uncomfortable. Of course, 8-10 years old going up there with a mic, but at the same time, it's also something that I call home. I'm going to ask you a question to kind of switch gears. What has been an important factor in building a positive home environment from your experience? Maybe what you've seen, and what has not helped?
That's a really good question. So I worked in children's and family ministry for about 20 years. I'm a lead pastor of a church now, and it's interesting. People who go through terrible things as a child, they often grow up and they make one of two decisions. Either they choose to repeat, maybe unintentionally, the mistakes that they experienced and to also traumatize the next generation, or they choose, which is what we hope for them to do, they choose to make themselves the last person who's going to experience that trauma in their family tree. They decide to change their family tree. They decide to be intentional about raising their kids up, protecting them in a way that maybe they were not protected, giving them a blessing in a way that they were not blessed. My wife and I, Rose, we were both intentional about that as young married people. We got married when we were 19 and started a family very young. And from the start, we knew that we didn't really have a good groundwork to start building a home with. We didn't really come from Christian homes. And when we came to our faith, just a couple years after we got married, we very quickly started studying and researching, because we wanted our kids to be raised in a hope-filled way that we didn't have as kids, with grace and with mercy and with as much love as we could ever imagine. We always told our kids, and they've tested us on this in some ways, there's nothing you can do that will ever make us love you less. And that reassurance of we will be a consistent source for them and consistently there for them no matter what decisions they make, it really has given them a different sense of family than what Rose and I had as kids.
You sharing that, I just reminded, especially there's moments when I'm thinking about my life and when I was not doing as well. And I remember now that I'm doing much better, I remember wanting to give back. And I think you as a parent could understand, my mom's biggest thing is like, just keep doing better. Take care of you. That is your gift to me. So like a lot of times it's like there's never really, as a parent, or if you see a loved one who's struggling, it's never really, I need something, I need anything tangible. Usually it's more like, keep getting better for me. That's how you do better for me. And for me, I think that kind of tells me a lot about how homes are structured. It's not like a tit for tat. It's more about, hey, I want to help you get to where you can be. It's kind of like a teacher. Teacher wants their students to be better than them. It's not about them being the one who knows or understands. It's about passing on the knowledge so the ones who are learning, understand more, and maybe it's about passing on what you were given to you at that time. And I think that is a beautiful illustration of what home can be, and provide that kind of safety and feeling.
We either become people that go out and slay the dragon that tries to destroy us as children, or we become the dragon. And it's so important to, especially if you're thinking about building a home and creating a positive environment for your family. It's so important that you just take a gut check every once in a while and you ask yourself, am I repeating the mistakes that hurt me so bad as a kid? It's a hard thing when someone, it's a hard thing to do, but giving someone close to you permission to speak truth into your life and say, yeah, you're doing this same thing that your mom did, or that your dad did, or that whoever did. But it's so important that accountability really helps build a positive environment when it can be done in safety and the strength of a good relationship.
Yeah, I think, I want to say also, thank you for your service. I was in the Air Force, just joking, Air Force. I was in there. No, but I just want to say that when you're in, at least in boot camp, I remember real quickly, I went early, just like right after high school, and I remember.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
It was very much like at that age you thought you were awesome sauce, and even if you were, it didn't matter, because if someone was slower in your for us, we had flights, if they weren't, they couldn't keep up, then all of us ran a lot more. So it's kind of that camaraderie that I feel really helped me get, obviously get the work ethic, but also perspective at that age.
Yeah.
Understanding that we're not that great, but we work better. We do better. It's this one African proverb: if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go further, go together. That kind of idea, that
Yeah.
the camaraderie, and I had to say that. I wanted to also say thank you for your service on that
Oh, and
regard.
likewise. I think that's a common experience. I think people in the military have that
Mhm.
experience because there is this depending on one another for all the branches of the military, and the police force is like that, the fire departments like that. I think people that work in public service, they learn to work in teams and under the crucible of danger, and I think that's
Yeah,
what that seriousness of an environment really makes a big difference.
it does, and it's kind of it can bring out some of the best in people that you would not even expect.
Yeah.
I want to share, obviously those who are listening or watching. This is your book that's like it's come out, or is it? It's right
Yeah.
out, right
I
there.
got
And
the
stuff.
printed proof just this week, so I'm super excited.
Yeah. So those who are watching, obviously those who are listening, there's going to be links on the bottom that you could find out more. But I want to kind of switch gears and allow you to share a little bit about yourself, about this book, about what brought you to where you're at today. To those listening,
Sure.
to
Uh, so during the pandemic season, my daughter, got really interested in beekeeping and turned me on to it. And we ended up selling our house and moving from the city and buying a small farm, a little 16-acre place near the church that I lead now. And I started beekeeping because of her interest. And
mm,
what I very quickly found is the more I learned about beekeeping, the more it seemed to bring God's word to life.
oh,
And so I started putting together some messages that taught some of the things that I was learning about bees that I saw as really powerful analogies. And so what we were just talking about, the idea of starting a home or building a positive environment in your home. One of the chapters in the book, I talk about, I kind of juxtapose God as creator. He created a hope-filled environment. His creation was perfect at the start, and it wasn't
oh,
until the fall that it started to fall apart. And I kind of compare that to the steps a beekeeper goes through to create a safe place for the bees. You don't go into beekeeping thinking I'm going to create a snack buffet for the skunks and the possums. You create
yeah.
a healthy environment, and so it's very much helping to build a home, and then you can learn a lot from the bees because they're such simple but amazing creatures about hope and how to live in unity with one another.
I know one of my family friends. They beekeep, and I just remember the process being very arduous and like
Yeah,
very detailed. And just for me, I always find it like I have another friend who does saltwater like tanks, and there's so much upkeep. There's so much
yeah,
the even with all the electronics, keeping the levels on the saltwater tank, so the corals and everything. I was just amazed at the detail and how much he, or at least my friend, my college friend, would spend time after time. I'm like, and then now that he's doing it now, he does his own business on corals. I'm not surprised. He's just
mm,
dived into it. There's something, the simplicity of what he's doing, but also the attention to detail kind of reminds me of maybe what you're describing is
yeah,
outside people like beekeeping.
yeah, right.
Yeah, but there's something I know for myself because I'm pretty quick. I know my wife will say I'm pretty, quick on things, and sometimes I realize I keep telling myself I do my best work when I slow down. Simply
Mm-hmm.
put, like a lot of times in the healthcare field we do a lot of documenting. You can imagine. So I remember at first when I started, I was like, this is. I used to think that like writing all this stuff was going to take half an hour, hours. I timed myself as like 7 minutes, and I realized the time is very distorted in our minds, and like I had to
Yeah.
kind of train. It's a behavior thing. I had to train myself that no, I'm going to sit here and be calm and present where I'm at. And I feel like a lot of times when my friend was, seems like the tank was leaking, things were not going well, just work the problem
Yeah.
slowly, and at the
And
same time.
and enjoy it, if you enjoy your hobby,
Yeah.
I'm assuming it's a hobby for him. Beekeeping's a hobby for me. If you enjoy it, then it really is a blessing. Every time
Yeah.
I go out there, and I just sometimes will go on a walk in between working, or just at the end of the day, I'll walk out to the apiary where the bees are, and I'll just watch them and just see what they're doing. We'll
Mhm.
plant flowers to watch them, and I
Yeah.
talk about some of that in the book. But we one of the fascinating things about them is people think, well, there's a queen bee, and the queen bee. This is what I thought actually when I started beekeeping. The queen bee is in charge. She's the boss, so she runs the house. But that's not true at all. What they've discovered is that the queen bee, she just has a job to do, and her job is laying eggs. And the whole unit, like the colony of bees, you would say that the whole colony, or you could call them a hive. People use different terms like that, but they exist as a single unit. They are a superorganism. They're in so much in unity with one another. Everyone has a purpose. Everyone
Mm.
contributes. Everyone exists in the goal of making the whole better. That it's really a remarkable example of what a family should operate like. Everyone doing their job, doing their part. And even more powerfully, you could say it's what a church should look like,
Yeah.
or a work environment. Everyone is working together, and they just know what they're supposed to do, and they're filled with purpose. I think when we know our purpose, it does unleash hope in us.
Ex-
I think.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I also feel, and this might be, some people may not agree, but I don't really feel there is such a thing as a person who is completely lazy. I don't think that word is really
Yeah.
accurate. I think you get someone really passionate about, if they're driven, like everyone has something they're really excited about. And especially when you're working with younger people, or you're dealing with people in the church setting. I have, I run the sound. I do the head sound and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
a lot of times it's one of those positions where no one knows anything is wrong until no one really
Yeah.
knows I'm there until something wrong happens. But
Right.
at the same time, it's also seeing, my job is, and the way I see it is, I'm doing my job when there's no room for me in the sound
Yeah.
booth. So that's where it comes to. But I also think, like Winston Churchill said, we shape our homes, and then our hope shapes us. Home shapes us. So the idea is, I feel just like you're sharing with your beekeeping. There's something about taking the time and looking around you, and where you could see great examples of like bees and such in nature, that show how connected people, that they can be, and how they can act as such a one unit. I know
We
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 got
adopt we
we got a guest.
sorry. we we
Okay.
farm we kind of farm cats here. My
No,
wife loves cats, and we've adopted
no
several
worries.
cats we've rescued, and this is the youngest one, and
He's
it's the witching
interested.
hour for him. He's running around.
It's totally fine, totally fine. But is there anything else you want to share, like in regards to the book? Anything that led you behind? Obviously, you mentioned that your daughter inspired you to go be
Yeah.
beekeeping, but what inspired you to write the book? Like, I know that you were.
Yeah. So I mentioned I'm a pastor. I write my sermons out as manuscripts because it helps me to focus. But
Mm,
sometimes I lose focus when I'm talking, so it helps me stay focused.
mm,
And actually, earlier this year, I broke my toe, and so I was stuck. I was stuck sitting, and so I'm just going to work ahead and write some messages. And
mm,
God laid this idea on me of to talk about hope. We live in a world that is filled with the opposite of hope, which is despair.
mhm,
And you see it all around. You see people just struggling. And so I wanted to preach a message about hope for our church community. And I found that the more I thought about the honeybees and the more I was
mm,
studying them,
mm,
they are hope-filled little creatures. There's so many analogies in their lives. I mentioned the superorganism thing, but also the fact that the wow, some of the ways of how they mate, the way that they reproduce, and the swarm will leave and start a new colony. It's kind of sings a song about discipleship, if you will, or
mm,
teaches a story about discipleship and spreading and sharing resources. they are also attacked. A lot of times we feel that we're attacked by our circumstances, or just we can miss out on goodness. You mentioned how people are not really lazy. Sometimes people are just hungry, or
Yeah.
they're just hurting, and so that
Yeah.
causes their work ethic to kind of get pushed aside because they're going through a difficult situation, where they have mental health issues that keeps them from being able to focus. Well, you think about that kind of stuff unleashes despair. And when people
Mm.
are struggling with despair, that there is still hope. Like, there is
Yeah.
still an eternal hope that we get to look forward to as people of faith. And that's what the story of the book tells. That the book alternates chapters between a
Mm.
message from the Bible about hope with an
Mm.
analogy that teaches a little bit about honeybees. And so it's a creative way of
Mm.
trying to bring hope to people. And I'm hoping it'll be a blessing to people during this Christmas season that's coming up.
Yeah, and I think it kind of reminds me of just in the Gospels, just how parables were used a lot, and like
Yeah,
back then, those parables were very relatable to the people. Listen to them; they understood exactly what that meant. And I think
yeah,
just using one illustration and sharing several different stories and elements of understanding, we have a lot of information out there. But everyone hears only what he understands. As
yeah,
yeah, so I think the difference, especially growing up, when I remember in high school I had a beeper, aging me a little bit. But the idea is we have so much connectedness, like in the ways of technology, but there's not much connection. And not only that is there's a lot of information, but not a lot of understanding. So
mm,
like sometimes mathematically getting to the derivative of what we're really trying to say can actually help kind of flush out. There's a lot of words we use that we don't even know what those words really mean anymore. That's why I'm really hounding the difference between a house and a home. Yeah, and in
yeah,
different cultures, it doesn't translate the same, but the idea is the concept of it all.
yeah,
Home provide something that not just a place where you feel safe, but a place that maybe a physical place, but it provides some intangible value than just what a house can or a shelter. You think of
right,
a shelter is it shelters you, but when you talk about a home, there's something more significant. You mentioned before just there was a story of the father who had on his desk this poorly made art thing, but that was his son's that for a longest time, and we put so much value of these things, and if we look at it very just objectively, like, well, that's not really well made, but for the father, he's like, that's
right,
the best thing in the world. I don't know what you're talking about.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
I so I think
mm,
understanding with especially with this quote kind of speaks a lot of where we're at. Speaking with working with pastors several times. A lot of times we are just a lot of uncertainty, but I think understanding that we're kind of unfinished, but that's okay. Like at any state of our life right now, we're kind of
mm,
unfinished of what we may be moving, but the process is something that if we're able to kind of grasp it and understand it and appreciate it, it's better as opposed to just thinking about some offshoot milestone moving forward.
yeah.
Uh,
And when
but
you think about difficult seasons that we go through, sometimes those difficult seasons define us and allow us to then understand and have some empathy for someone else who's going through a difficult season. So it all has purpose. And one of the
yeah,
things I argue or make a point about in the book is when we understand our purpose, it does unleash hope in us. It gives us a sense of optimism because we know why we exist, and more importantly, we know for whom we exist, and what our eternity looks like. Like, we don't just place our hope in this world, the things around us, because that can lead us to despair when those things fail us. If our hope is in our shelter and then it gets blown over, then to use a parable that Jesus talked about, we're like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. It's wiped away. It's gone, and so then you're left despairing.
hmm yes. I want to ask you a question, switching gears. What have you seen work for yourself and others when you're maintaining, not just building a home, but maintaining? gaining and maintaining a home, and what has not. Where you mentioned your book, you mentioned
Yeah,
all the lessons, but what? How about like maintaining it? A lot of times people have a home at the time, and
yeah,
then right after, we've seen a lot of, and I'll just be frank, after COVID-19, a lot of people spend a lot of time together that they normally don't. They're always at work
yeah,
or they have this separation, and so unfortunately and sadly, that provided more problems because now
mm,
they're with people in a more confined space. But when you see this question, what comes to mind when you, if you can ask for, like, share your insight on this?
yeah. I mean, I mentioned purpose with the honeybees. When
Mm.
a honeybee is born, when a worker bee is born, the very first thing she does is she cleans the little chamber that she was raised in, so that it makes. It's the very first thing she does. There's something I'll preach on that too for kids, but but she starts out her life by cleaning and by creating a safe environment for the next person, for the next egg that's going to be laid there. And I think in that sense, like creating our homes and maintaining our homes to be a safe place is
Mm.
so important. Sometimes, not to oversimplify cleaning, but sometimes cleaning house really can help our mental health a lot. If we're
Mhm.
in an environment that's dirty, or there's things around that are triggering for us,
Mm.
that remind us of bad things, and it's good to eliminate those things or remove those things. I think if we can build a space where it's safe to have conversations, and where everyone knows, hey, there's no bad questions. Like sincerely, if you're confused about something, talk about it. Um, if you're hurting, let's sit down and talk. I think those things are really important. A lot of men, self included, have limited vocabulary when it comes to talking about their emotions, and so allowing people to fumble the ball as they talk through their emotions, and to maybe even not say the right thing, can create a really safe environment and a healthy home. That, again, to use the analogy of that honeybee, is kind of like cleaning things out and making a safer place for the next generation to be able to establish themselves.
Yeah, and I feel that the safety is paramount. I
Yeah,
mentioned the very beginning, and the very, I guess, practical way. If you're in a home that you don't feel that you could ask for help, that
right.
can be very problemsome. If
With
you're,
shame
yeah,
or anger, problems like that, that can make it so hard to ask for help because you feel like a failure.
yes, and that for me is like part of the drive to have these discussions, have the kind of these conversations drawn out, because at the end of the day, you know, if you're not able to ask for help, if you can't say I need help, that in itself creates an environment that's not safe for you to kind of share that
Mm,
those three words. And also accountability, like you said, you mentioned that interchangeably safety, because accountability is not a bad word if it's a safe place. If you're
right.
a safe place around people who actually want you to better yourself, to improve on yourself, then you know finding accountability, being like, okay, I didn't get it done this time, I'm going to try again tomorrow. The idea is, this healthy environment. Okay, I'm going to improve on this, and knowing that, just like, certain parts of my life I maybe have weak points, and recognizing that can be very helpful moving forward. And at the same time, being kinder to yourself as opposed to
Yeah.
just nice. I feel the word nice sometimes gets kind of clumbled up in this kind of weird. But I understand the emphasis. It's, you want to be polite, but I think being kind is a more appropriate word nowadays than
And
nice.
yeah, because regionally it's different, right? I mean,
Yeah.
depending on what part of the world you live in, or even what part of the U.S. you live in, a smile can mean different things, and
Yeah.
kindness can be either hiding manipulation,
Yeah.
or it can be genuine.
Yeah.
It really is hard to know. That was one of the things I remember learning from, again, being in the military and being surrounded by people from different parts of the country.
Hmm.
They didn't greet strangers, and I grew up in a small town where you knew everyone, and so I waved at everyone, and I had to learn living in Southern California not to wave at people even if I thought I knew them. It was,
Yeah.
a totally different thing. It meant something different, and that
Yeah.
cultural stuff's so important.
Yeah, it's that cultural awareness. Is just understanding your surroundings and respecting them.
Yeah,
In Korea, there's a word called nunchi. Actually, it's an untranslatable word, but basically describes the ability to kind of read a room very clear. Like, I don't know
yeah,
why there's a word like that, but it's kind of, I guess for me, it just shows a little bit of the Korean culture. They put a lot of
yeah,
this, even in the language, and I don't know it very well, but even in the language, there's a lot of assumed context. So you won't say the full sentence because the context is already assumed that you know it. So
huh,
everything. So in that regards, it just shows intentionality when it comes to understanding and reading situations and attaching the context. And I feel like in our own lives,
hmm,
if we're able to do that more effectively, just like I said, like if I had, I don't know, high blood pressure and I wanted a second opinion, or I want the medicine wasn't working, I'll go and find it. But sometimes with these other socially they're stigmatized conditions, we don't do so because it's attached to our value, which I don't think is true. I think a lot of times we're just struggling and we just need help and we need to find
hmm,
safe environments. Jeremy Rayner says building is about getting around the obstacles that are presented to you. It's just adjusting. A lot of times, if we're angry, doesn't mean that we're a bad person. It just means something needs to change. That's all.
yeah.
You need to
Well,
reassess.
and anger is
Yeah.
a really useful emotion. It can help you really quickly figure out what you care about.
Mm,
It's not always a bad thing. It can prompt you to action. It can make you aware of injustice. I mean, it can be really helpful. It's just
mhm.
when it's unchecked. If you get angry about an obstacle, to use Jeremy Renner's quote, if you get angry about an obstacle, then you better you've got to do something about it. You can't just ignore it because it upset you,
Mhm.
or it's hurting someone, it's causing problems, and yeah, that's good.
And as we wrap up, I just a lot of times want to ask my guests, ask you, what would you want people to be reminded of in this November? In the states. Obviously, I think Canada had their Thanksgiving last month, but
Uh,
I'm just saying, in the states, what would just in regards to what we're talking about when building a home? Any final thoughts you have? Anything you want to add?
yeah, it's November, December. We're going into a season where, like around the world, a lot of families are spending time together because of the holidays this time of year, or even places where they celebrate New Year's. And when you come together with extended family, there can just be a lot of opportunities for hurt feelings and resurfacing things. And I think what I would just remind people as you go into that season, try and ask yourself, if you were still that child, if you were still that person, how would you want to be treated, and how would that look different, and how can you then extend that grace and that love and that mercy to people, even if they don't deserve it. You can create boundaries and keep people at a safe distance, and still communicate grace and love from a distance. There's nothing wrong with that. Going into the holidays and being around family, and you're thinking about maybe the little ones in your home. Are there intentional conversations you need to have with them about the boundaries that you've had to set with people in your family, or boundaries about conversations you don't have because someone's hurt. If someone to mention, to point out the analogy you started with at the beginning, with the point you made about, if someone's missing, if someone's not there at the table, talking to kids about grief.
Mm,
There is a lot of despair in our culture and grief because we don't talk about death, and we just kind of ignore it and just move on to the next thing. And sometimes the best thing we can do is just listen and have open ears and open hearts, slow
mm,
down enough, turn off the TV, put away the phones, and just be present
mm.
with someone when they're hurting, and it can make a huge difference. And I would encourage people as you go into the holidays. Yeah, there are people that are missing, in terms of that they've gone ahead of us, is I think I would say as a person of faith.
Mm.
Um, but if they're not there, talk about them. Don't forget them. In your grief, say their name. Speak their name to one another, and talk about the things that you appreciated about them, the things that they would have valued, the meal, like maybe something that they cooked that you miss having or they enjoyed. That don't just try to just gloss it over and move past it. When you do, you really miss a important part of teaching hope and teaching how to cope with despair.
I really appreciate you mentioning that, because it is something that a lot of times gets overlooked. Grief takes time, at the same time,
Yeah.
just and that's a lot of times where home environment, a safe home environment, can be a point of healing. If we're being honest, the idea is there's no right or wrong way to grieve. In the essence, it's going to just take the time it does. But I do appreciate you mentioning that. Don't keep it in, because a lot of times if you keep those things in and you ignore it, a lot of things just don't get addressed. A lot of these feelings are going to be, you're going to be angry, you're going to be sad, you're going to denial, you're going to have all these emotions, and it's better to do that in a safe environment with people close to you, like a home, whatever that is. I want to say
and then
thank
model it.
you. Yeah.
Model it for the other people around you. Yeah.
I just want to say thank you so much for coming and sharing your
Yeah.
insight.
Well, thanks for what you're doing. This is a real blessing to a lot of people, and I'm glad you're doing it. So.
No problem. I also want to share, as we wrap up, remember to all those who are listening to go to reviveministryfl.com. I'm going to go with Martin Luther King Jr. as our final quote. It's just something that I feel really it speaks volumes of what we're talking about. I've decided to stick with love. Hate is too great of a burden to bear. I share that sentiment to those who are out listening. As you enter the holidays, be reminded of this quote, because a lot of times, it is, learn to love, learn to forgive. Forgive can be a very healing component when it comes to these kind of hard things in life. But again, thank you, Michael, for joining the conversation.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, appreciate it.